Okay? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin this second session of this afternoon, and just in anticipation of Ingo's continuance, I have a kind of an announcement to make, or at least a remembrance. We've had a lot of fun, we've had a lot of adventures and a lot of excitement in the remote viewing field over the last 12 months. But we've had some sadness too. One person that we note the passing of was Stephen Schwartz's wife, Hayden Schwartz. They'd been married for something on the order of 30 years, I think, in that neighborhood. An unfortunate occurrence. And Bevy Jaggers, a fixture at these conferences, who also passed away suddenly just a few months back. So when I think about them. More personal to me is a tragedy that just occurred last Friday, and this is a bad sign. I don't know if I'm going to make it through this or not. I'm going to read a eulogy for my partner and my friend who was killed in a car wreck just last Friday. And this was written for someone to read at her memorial service that is, doggone it, taking place today at this time. Okay? And I hope you forgive the personal tone of this. It was meant to be personal for that service. But I think what I've tried to capture here it goes beyond the personal. And you get a feel for her and for the hole she has left in the community, in the remote viewing community, but perhaps maybe an idea of a feeling of scope, like Ingo was talking about. So anyway, with that, I'm going to try and get through this. Gabrielle Pettengell was many things to her parents and to her family. But to me, she was my friend, my co-worker, my sanity check, and for the past 2 years on a contractual basis, the director of operations for my business. She was also a remote viewer. This is something about her that some, perhaps most of those now hearing about it, did not know. From 1987 to 1991, Gabrielle was employed at what became known as Project Stargate, a Department of Defense program that spied on foreign enemies using a mental skill known as remote viewing. Remote viewing is a form of what is often referred to as ESP, or extrasensory perception, or whatever. It was developed and used by the U.S. government for nearly a quarter century, until declassified in 1995. Gabi was an integral part of that program. Using her exceptional remote viewing skills, she provided information on targets as diverse as American hostages in Beirut, important research and development centers in the Soviet Union, military installations in sensitive areas of the Middle East, and narco-traffickers in the Caribbean and Pacific regions. A number of intelligence operations were successful because of her work. She was also an outstanding teacher of the skill, a function she continued as a remote viewing instructor for my company. Many of her students developed a close bond with her and share our grief at her sudden passing. One highlight of Gabrielle's remote viewing career came in May 1987 when she was chosen to demonstrate remote viewing to 4 U.S. senators in the Hart Office Building in Washington, D.C. Present were Senators John Glenn, Daniel Inouye, Warren Rudman, and William Cohen, who later became Secretary of Defense. We were scheduled for only an hour or so of their time, but so captured the senators' attention that we ended up spending nearly the whole morning with them. One large reason for that was Gabi's impressive remote viewing session against a secret target the senators themselves had picked. Her performance went a long way to gaining congressional support for Stargate for several years to come. Though she eventually went on to other duties and assignments, Gabrielle never left remote viewing behind. For example, working with me in late 1996, she provided information about a serious crime in the American Northwest that proved highly accurate. And Ferent Zana, who is here, can attest to what she did. At the time of her passing, she, I, and John Kovacs, a remote viewing student, were involved in a remote viewing experiment that in some aspects was proving highly successful and would have gained Gabi great notoriety had we been able to finish it. She was crucial to this experiment, and it will now be a long time, if ever, before we will be able to successfully complete it. In fact, Gabrielle Pettengell was an important resource to the remote viewing community. Besides being an outstanding teacher of that skill, She had a grasp of the viewing part of the process that was second to none, and an equally profound understanding of the tasking and analysis, both of which are essential to success. No one, and I mean that literally, had as thorough and broad a grasp of these issues. It may well be years before anyone will again equal her level of competence and understanding. There are different sizes of infinity. And while her loss to her family is infinitely greater than is my loss, mine is infinite as well. Every human is in some respect irreplaceable. Gabrielle, however, was infinitely irreplaceable. Still, she has moved on, and we must persevere here where she has left us behind. There is for me one comfort. My religious background assures me that life continues beyond death, but I have more than mere faith or belief to sustain me. The activities that Gabrielle and I and many others engaged in brought and continue to bring conclusive proof that human consciousness transcends the physical bounds of our bodies. We are literally more than our physical selves. Our consciousness, our awareness can range to the other side of the planet and no doubt to the other side of the universe. We, Gabi and I, have had the experiences and seen the evidence to prove it. No one knows more certainly than I that Gabrielle Pettengill is still a living, thinking being somewhere, if not here anymore. And I know just as surely that she even now retains the ability to know how we feel about her and be warmed by it. I'm not going to wish Gabi that she rests in peace. Peace I am certain she has. But God has a mission for her to do, whatever it is, and she will be no more content to idle away the time where she now is than when she was here among us and there was a job to be done. My best and warmest wishes to Gabi's family, friends, and loved ones. Now, when something as seemingly meaningless as what happened to Gabrielle Pettengill occurs, we look for a meaning in it somehow, or want to infuse some sort of meaning in it. So, we've consulted with her family, we consulted with a number of you, and oftentimes people want to, like donate something or give flowers or something like that. For those of you who are newer and feel so moved, we've established a Gabrielle Pettengill Fund that will go to IRVA to promote some good remote viewing based accomplishment, to try and accomplish something in remote viewing in that field. Gabi was very committed to remote viewing. She believed in it. She believed it was important. She believed it was one of the most important things there is right now going on. And so, if you feel so moved, I'd like to ask you in the memory of Gabrielle Pettengill, as well as Hayden and Bevy, to contribute to that fund so that we can use it to do something really meaningful in some way to add meaning to what's happened here. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was working with
Say who you are.
I am John. I was working with Gabrielle. I'm a student of in January. Gabrielle, she wasn't tasking me, and I called her up on the phone, and about 10 days later, and I said, "How come you didn't task me?" And she said that my daughter's gerbil died, and I said, "That's just ridiculous." I couldn't believe it, and then she said, "John, I have to teach my daughters about life and death." And, it sounded ridiculous, but now's the point in time that I understand that. And Russell was up here talking about the power of prayer, and you can't imagine how Gabrielle's daughters are devastated, and if you could just keep them in your prayers, that's all we can do at this point in time. It's just incalculable and just a titanic loss. It's unbelievable.
So on these cheerful notes, sorry to do that to you, Ingo, but I want to have Ingo invite Ingo back up and continue. He was the one that made it possible for Gabi and I to have these experiences, and it seems very fitting that he'd be the one to be talking now and helping enlighten us to the things that have made so much difference to the world so far. Ingo?
Second before that mic's on.
Check, check. They're still running around here, so.
Yeah, no, you're ready to go.
I'm ready to go. It's always terrible when people have an untimely, unexpected death, and all of the people around them really regret it. I've lost about 35 people whom I've valued throughout the years. So this might not be the time to talk about the next subject matter, called human reality boxes. Anybody have one? Okay. Human reality boxes, mind formatted within cultural, group, social, and individual levels. Do you know, have you ever seen another social reality box? Well, how about a national one? Well, you know, the Brits hate the frogs and the frogs hate the Brits over in Europe, and so there's two different national reality boxes, right? And the names they call each other are not to be believed. The items I've talked about so far are, believe it or not, well within the realms of conventional scientific research as we speak and have been for a while. But we have one problem called human reality boxes, and this is the least studied of all human phenomena. But in Hollywood, there's an old saying, well, not old, a new saying, you know, we have to start thinking outside the box to find movies that will make us more money, because the old boxes aren't making us much money. And then in New York, there was, for a while, on the sides of buses, an advertisement on behalf of The Economist, which is a very famous financial magazine, saying, "Think outside the duodecahedron." And coming on the airplane yesterday in the airline magazine, there was an article saying, we've got to think outside of the blue reality box. Well, I don't know what that one was, but at least getting outside of the box is in the public domain, if not in science. Scientists can't really afford to examine reality boxes because they end up examining their own theories, and they don't particularly want to do that. Parapsychologists are like that too. And politicians are like that. So to just briefly go through reality boxes, a box is a noun, a rigidly typical rectangular receptacle, often with a cover. That's okay? Verb, to enclose as if in a box. So actually, people think that there's one function of a box, that's to keep stuff inside of it, right? But there's another function, that's to keep stuff outside of it too. And so when we talk about reality boxes, we have realities inside the box which keep things in and keep things out. Have you ever met anybody with a strong reality box that you could reason with? I didn't call them back then when I was a child, but when I was like 7 years old, I found my first reality boxes that were impervious to just about everything else. The major function of human constructed reality boxes is what? Human reality boxes are information lenses and screens that contain, stabilize, balance, and protect protect accepted versions of reality or assumed reality. I hate to ask you a question again, but do you know anybody that acts like that? Reality box making is inherent in our species, generic innate hard drive systems. Our species has been constructing reality boxes ever since we can find any evidence of humans that can think, right? I think so anyway. And you read architectural things and so forth, and you see all these ruins and everything. Egyptian, the difference between Egyptian and ancient Indian sculptures and buildings and everything, you can see that these were different reality boxes that produced these things. And of course, there are unconfirmed rumors that the Egyptians tried to invade India and take them possession as slaves, and the Indians tried to invade Egypt and take them as slaves. These don't not really commented too much in archaeology manuals. But you know, you get a good social reality box going, and you give it power, and you give it the ability to build and construct and to have energy, and pretty soon that reality box, you know, is on two legs, and here's this big social reality box going around with spears and guns sticking out of it, and doing things to other reality boxes which have guns and spears sticking out of them. The story of our species, as long as our species is not considered as one species, but as a series of socio-economic organizations which are in competition with each other. So you transliterate this reality box thing down into our little remote viewing association, and what might you find? Hey, come on. Well, except for the term remote viewing, you know, it could be discovered, I'm saying just could be discovered, that not all remote viewers are of the same mind, or even rowing the same boat. And you can certainly find that in parapsychology. You know, each parapsychologist treated each other as if they were the enemy state. And I lived amongst this for too many years. And, you know, they didn't even like me. I mean, they don't like each other. A former parapsychologist and I once got the idea of giving the equivalent of Academy Awards for the most successful psychic tasks found during a year. You know, if some psychic finds the dead body that the police wants, that's worth an award, don't you think? And if somebody really PKs the devil out of something, and it's a good scientific experiment, that's worth an award, you know. Well, guess who our biggest enemies were?
Each other.
Well, first of all, the psychics hated this idea. And they weren't going to cooperate. They wouldn't take an award even if we offered them one. And then the parapsychologist says, what is this? This isn't science, this is just glamour. Well, yes, it's glamour, but you've got to give an award to good performance when you see it, or else it dies away. It has to be nurtured and things like that. So, anyhow, we have reality boxes, and they're very pertinent to remote viewing and to our subtle sensing systems, because reality boxes can keep in subtle sensing systems, and it can keep other ones out. So some few of us here may have reality boxes that are keeping their own subtle senses from working. Now, I'm sure that's not true here, but it could be. Okay, 3 major complications with reality boxes. Everyone dwells within some kind of reality box, including little me, humble me. All reality boxes incorporate different sets of packaged information. Right? You all may think you're agreeing on remote viewing here, but it wouldn't be too long before you'd find things you didn't agree about, and then you'd be maybe spitting in each other's faces. I've seen that happen, you know. Thus, reality boxes are only as good as the information they do and do not contain. Would you agree to that? I mean, if it works, works. If it doesn't work, there must be reasons it doesn't work, you know. So we have reality boxes that have information packages of all kinds in them. We have the same reality boxes might have great gray areas, empty areas where there's no information packages. These are vacuums. So a reality box is only as good as the information it contains plus the information it doesn't contain. Is this an alien idea to you? Here, I'll show you what. Here's a reality box. The dots are information packages. And there's some areas that don't have any information packages in them where there could be, there should be, but those are reality box vacuums. They don't have any information there. They're dead areas. Like when I had my brain done up in Dr. Persinger's lab 2 years ago, and I did an MRI thing and everything like that, he discovered white matter of the aging brain. So I'm having an aging brain already with white matter in it, and that's parts of the brains that don't function, right? So reality boxes that have a lot of white matter in them don't function either. I'm sorry to bring all of this up, because people don't like to think their reality boxes may not be any good. They like to think that their reality boxes are wonderful. Well, I do too. All right, reality boxes have a ratio of more information to less information. And what we normally have is the inheritance from our culture, reality box making social systems. We all have more reality information about the physical universe than we do about non-physical things, you know. I mean, if you live here in Texas, as my mother and stepfather did for many years, and you went to their little community, and these were elderly, experienced people, all they could talk about was their bodies, their most recent operations, how long the recovery time, and how bad the doctors were, or how bad the nurses were, and what they were going to eat next. And there's one reason I lived in New York. I mean, that's fine, you know, these are people, but one reason I lived in New York is because the reality box level there was totally different, you know. You found people there that were interested in art and dancing and literature and the theater and things like that, and didn't know very much at all about the physical universe. And when they complained, all they complained about was the sabotage they were experiencing in the social climate of these different professions, and how art gallery dealers cheated them and this and that and everything, but you never heard hardly anything about how their bodies were, or how about their latest operations and things. And now this even has all changed in New York, because you go into a social situation in New York and all people talk about is the kind of bottled water they drink, what gyms they're going to, and what the latest trend-setting thing is that they should be wearing, and how many tattoos or not they should be getting, and plus how many piercings in their ears they should have. So, you know, this has become really uninteresting for me. But these are reality boxes, you know, at everybody's level and things like that. So you go to one of these reality boxes and say, hey, how would you like to read the president's mind and develop your telepathy? And they look at you and say, what are you talking about? I mean, they can't even see the advantage of this. Now here's what a reality box really looks like. You see, up here on top of it is the non-yet discovered innate potential possibilities that we all have access to at some level of information input, and through the full spectrum of human sensing systems. You can see that we can access any information we want as long as we know how to do it and can permit it itself to go through our processes and everything, and be in our reality box whether we believe it or not. So down here is the reality box. You see these mean eyes? Is that focused? There. You see? Limited to reality box frame of reference. You see these mean eyes I put there? I mean, when you look at its eyes and you see they're looking at you meanly, the eyes aren't looking at you, the reality box is. Have you ever observed this in people? Well, look for it. You're going to find it if you look for it. So reality box frames of reference can be fixed, set, prescribed, determined, persistent, stubborn, obstinate, immovable, rigid, resistant to change, and might malfunction due to knowledge vacuums. You know anybody that fits that? Has this ever been described to you before? From a podium? With a slide? The biggest complication, now get this, the biggest complication about reality boxes is that they completely and utterly belong to the inside. They don't exist on the outside. They are composed of the invisible mind and its processes, and it takes some kind of telepathy to penetrate the inside of reality boxes. Anything that's on the inside cannot be penetrated by anything on the outside, right? So you have to have inside penetrating inside. And that's called one form of telepathy. But guess what? Look at this. Can you focus it? Do you know anywhere that good telepathy exists? Do you know why not? Do you know how many power figures in this world are determined that no telepathy shall exist because the ultimate outcome is what? Now, this is a very important issue, you know. Even in our program at SRI, the funding parties were okay about remote viewing as long as it did buildings and it did labs and it did high wire things and so forth and so on. But when it came to telepathy, these same funding people wouldn't sit with me, wouldn't let me come to lunch with Puthoff and the higher ups because they were afraid I could read their minds. I had to eat in the cafeteria instead of the dining room on these things. And Powell and Russell volunteered to bring me to Washington to talk to people. They said, don't bring him. He'll know all our secrets, our mental secrets and things like that. So I had to put up with this diminishment and smile, continue to smile. In fact, it's one of my considerations that the project was ultimately canceled because of the telepathy aspect of it. You know, on stage 5, Hal might remember this. On stage 5, the viewers began to get in some kind of phonetics words that don't exist in the physical universe, but are words applied to what the sites are. I'll show you 4 examples of this afternoon. And this was, we think that what can be written is physical, but actually what's written is a function of the human mind first. So it belongs to the inside. And so when we began to get bits and pieces of words, you know, we were saying these aren't physical signals. These aren't signals coming from physical sources. They're coming from a mental source of some kind. And we began to think of this in terms of finding the entrance to telepathy. So there were some guys that used to come from Washington and see what we were doing and everything. Now, I have to be a little latrine-like in telling you this story, because one day I needed to go do number 2, so I went into the men's room, and I was sitting in this stall with the door closed and everything, and 2 of these inspectors from Washington came in, and one was saying they were doing their number 1 business. And they were standing there, and they didn't know I was there. So now one of them said, geez, you know, they're really getting somewhere. This is just really wonderful. And the other one said, yeah, but you know they're going to be reading our bleeping minds next. And then I went down to Hal and I reported what I heard and said, you know, I think that we're pretty much to the end of our project because they're never going to let this happen, ever. Do you think that the CIA wants us to be able to read their minds? Or DIA? No? You think they want, you know, the CIA, you haven't had much experience with CIA people, but they're very nervous. Mostly about their status. And you know, and in the CIA, I think it's fair to say, you know, you can fake it until you make it, and telepathy would reveal things like that. Anyhow, I can get diverted in with these little kinds of thoughts here. Now, there's another difficult thing about reality boxes, and here it is. A walking, talking reality box with eyes and some kind of ego. Have you met one of those? Anyhow, you see, there are not too many dots up here. There's information packages that are missing in this here. And you get down to the bottom, and that's really mostly about physicality. And the white spaces are information vacuums, knowledge vacuum. So we take this concept of the reality box and we apply it to our intrepid remote viewer. And this is what the three parts of remote viewing look like. The outside, the signals from the target, the inside, which is incorporated within a reality box. So this is what the individual remote viewer really has to deal with themselves, all of this. And if they think their reality box is right about everything, then that's all they're ever going to see. If they think other people's reality boxes are wrong, then there's going to be internecine warfare amongst, to say the least, remote viewers who are in competition with each other. And here's what this looks like. You see, these are different reality boxes, and they're all different, and they're going puff, puff, and they're going blah, 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 and then they go grr, grouch, and grr with each other. And if you read some of the chat pages on the internet about remote viewing, you're going to see lots of puff, puff, and grr, and nobody's laughing. Oh yeah? However, believe it or not, there's a larger picture beyond the individual, because remote viewing belongs to perceptual processes inherent and innate in our species. And those perceptual processes have their own reality systems and organization. Can you see that? I mean, you have to give up a lot. You have to give up your own realities in order to learn new realities and things like that. And actually, if you find the rules and regulations that belong to the natural processes of information transfer, you can track those, and then you can become a remote viewer. All right, the final thing I wanted to do this morning but couldn't do is incoming remote viewing information bits per second versus the range of conscious attention. Does that make sense to you? And my left ear's ringing. Is somebody psychically attacking me? Dang. Ah, there. Okay, the range of conscious attention. Has anybody ever considered that? What is a range of conscious attention? Well, you have a small range or a big range, right? Variable. Or was that the party in the other room? God. So, okay. Tray 2. Sorry. Okay, if you have a small range of conscious attention, you're only going to process a small amount of information bits. So if you have a bigger range of conscious attention, you're going to be able to process more information bits per second. Now, I earlier warned you, you don't need to really understand what I'm saying, because there are things and processes in you that already understand this. Did you know you already have these things? I'm only talking about what you already have, even though you don't know it. So you could even take a nap if you wanted. Consciousness, sharing in knowledge of, having cognizance of, mentally alive or awake to, having internal perception or consciousness. Earlier on, I asked you to make this oval thing in your mind, and you did that, and I told you to turn it blue and asked you to turn it red, and you did that. So you could do that, but did you know how you did that? Do you know why that occurred? Well, nobody does, but it does occur. And so we have internal perception or consciousness, but we may not know why we have it. So we're not mentally alive or awake to that particular aspect of consciousness. We're most familiar with sharing in the knowledge of things. That's what we learned at school, right? And having cognizance of, we're very proud of what we know, and we don't really consider what we don't know. We're very proud of what we don't know too sometimes. This being Texas, of course. Ooh. Well, I've hung out in Texas for a little while, and in fact, they have this reputation, and I believe everything I hear. Subconscious. The definition of subconscious is partially or imperfectly conscious. Have you ever had stuff like that? Intuitives have it all the time. Oh, and another definition is belonging to a class of phenomena resembling those of consciousness but not clearly perceived or recognized. That should be familiar to you. It happens in dream states and things like that. Belonging to that portion of the mental field, the processes of which are outside the range of attention. When I asked you to do this little oval thing and turn it blue and right, you did it. But the processes that allowed you to do that were outside the range of your attention. Is that clear? Yeah, I can do the blue thing too, but I don't know how it's done. I mean, what are the processes behind it? If we don't know the processes behind something, we tend to think there aren't any. And there's processes behind everything. Now, let's sort of try to familiarize you with your range of attention. You see this? There's this bigger circle in the middle, and these 8 little circles around the outside. If you stare at the one in the middle, what happens to the one on the outside? One's on the outside. Pardon? I wish you'd speak up. Yeah. Put your attention on this little one down here, and look what happens to the big one even. Okay, do you know what's happening? You know why they disappear with your eyes open? You do not, very few people realize that the eyeball itself is doing little micro things like this, movements, up and down and backwards and things. And you need a laser measuring device to detect it. They're so minute. And remember the tracking machine at SRI when they could show that the eye is doing this. That's why you can look at the center one here, and some will disappear, but the eyes track doing this, and so it keeps them all in place, whether vaguely or not. Now, close your eyes and make an image of that bigger one in the middle, and the 8 ones around it. Focus on the bigger one in the middle, and observe what happens to the little ones on the outside. Anybody seeing it? Can anybody tell me anything? Are you trying to keep your attention on the one in the middle? What's happening to the ones on the outside?
They're still there.
They're still there?
Periphery.
Pardon?
Mine disappeared, but I always left different.
I still didn't hear you.
Mine disappeared,
Yeah.
but I always left different.
Yeah. With your eyes closed, the ones on the outside will tend to disappear because the eyeball micro movements are no longer important here. So you have to maintain on the inside your mental image picture, and in order to do that you have to focus your range of attention downward to keep the center one in place, at which times you have no range of attention that's doing the outside ones, so they tend to disappear. With your eyes closed, focus on this little one down here. Anything happening to the other ones? They're gone? So they tend to disappear, right? Now, in remote viewing, the only thing that you can put down on your paper and report as remote viewing is what appeared in this narrow range of attention, because you don't have your eyes to scan all of this and keep you in touch with the greater realities. And you can show this to yourself and even practice by next time you're driving out in the desert, stop your car and see this gorgeous lineup of mountains here. And then you can scan back and forth with your eyes. And then when you close your eyes and try to make an image picture of what you've seen, you'll find that it's narrowed down to one thing that attracted your attention the most, and the rest of it's going to disappear. And this is good practice. You should do it 2 times a day after lunch. Prescription. So this will put you more in touch with what actually is the range of attention. If you're looking, if the target you're assigned in remote viewing is something that covers 5 square miles of buildings and things like that, you're probably only going to bring back one small aspect of that fits into your range of attention, and that's what you'll put on your paper. And then you'll try to extrapolate what this is without having seen the overall bigger thing. We found a way to rectify that at SRI, by the way, and I'll tell you that shortly. Remote viewing information signals may enter human sensing systems in the subconscious, but if they do not enter the range of conscious attention, they will not be perceived. You can perceive only what enters into the range of conscious attention and gets into the cortex, where you can make a mental image picture of it, and that's what you'll be working with. So part of remote viewing training is working not to get the target, but just to expand your range of attention and your consciousness and things like that. And you have to gain control over that. And then you'll have options about what it is that the incoming signals are bringing to you. Did we discover something like that, Hal? Yeah. Can you say yes? Yes. There we go. Now occurs yet another pregnant question. Can the range of attention be trained, developed, and enhanced? And the reason I'm focusing on these kind of questions I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm having feedback in my ears. The reason I'm focusing on these kind of questions here is because people say that remote viewing can't be trained. And I agree with that. You can't train a word, but you can train. You can teach people how to expand the range of their perceptions, how to expand the range of their attention, how to expand their scope of information. And this goes on all the time. You're doing exactly the same thing when you teach somebody to become a computer genius, right? And if you want to teach a ballet dancer, you're going to teach them how to expand their range of attention and information packages about ballet dancing and things. So, what you're actually teaching, expanding, is the range of attention and consciousness. And when that occurs, then you can put it in various kinds of information packages. So, let's see. All right, attention first refers to the observant faculties, and then to a condition of perceptual readiness for attention, especially involving a selective narrowing or focusing of consciousness and receptivity. This is beginning to sound a little bit more like remote viewing, right? But it's now in its appropriate place because we've talked about all these other complicated things that need to precede it. Here we have the outside, and this little circle here is the range of attention, and here is the subconscious side beneath it. Inside processes outside the range of conscious attention. Can you see the bigger picture here? If not, I'll let you study this another minute. Study it. I got to put all this in my website, by the way, so you can dial it up and reflect on it at leisure. Range. The limits within a series. A sequence, series, or scale between limits. The scope between the least and the greatest values of an attribute, or the sum variability of a frequency distribution. So a range could vary. It can be small, at which time you don't have very large reality pictures, or it can be big, at which time you'll have a bigger reality picture. If you're going to remote view something, you're simply going to have to develop a bigger range of attention to get more information coming in. But there's a slight difficulty as with everything. How does anything get into the range of our attention? The slight difficulty put a different way, how does anything get into the range of our reality boxes? The best general answer is stuff gets into the range of our attention and reality boxes via human sensing systems. So we're right back at the vast scope of our natural human sensing systems. There are two major conditions of human sensing systems. First, they are innate in our species and the hard drive faculties of each individual. That's all of us here. We've got them. Second, the innate faculties undergo plus-minus modification via social, educative, and environmental programming. You have to admit that the social and environmental program of people born in Alaska is slightly different than those born in Addis Ababa in Africa. So we see these are software programs almost that are installed because of where you're born and what you're taught and where you live and everything like that. The net result of the two conditions is, at the individual level, the plus-minus extent of active sensing systems matches the limits of the software programming. Shall I repeat that? At the individual level, the plus-minus extent of active sensing systems matches the limits of the software programming. In other words, the only parts of your sensing systems you're going to have contact with are those that fit with the social programming that you've been trained to fit into. Is that okay with you? I don't want to pass something you don't really understand, you know. And therefore, does not match the full scope of the innate hard drive sensing systems. So, we're conditioned to perceive only thus and so by our social systems, and this does not match the full scope of what we're born with. That's what it means. How many here think that they were born with more perceptual sensing systems than have come into function?
Unfortunately, you have to be done by 3:25.
Well, what time is it now?
It's 5 to 3.
Okay.
Half an hour, okay?
I'm not going to be done. I need 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes than that?
Yes.
Well, let's take a vote. And as it stands right now, folks, as it stands right now, we're going to be done at 6:30, just the way it runs right now. Do you mind being done at 6:40? So Ingo can have that extra 10 minutes? Okay, you're going to be short on dinner, but that's okay. 7. You're willing to go to 7. Okay. You got it, Ingo.
Make somebody else finish sooner. Here in picture form is the net result of the two things we've talked about. The fuller scope of human sensing systems is this big darkened square here, which does exist, but it's dark. It's not operative in most of us. And down here is this little reality box that's we've been conditioned into believing, and it contains knowledge vacuums about everything up here. Remote viewing belongs up there, not down there. Okay, did you get all that? Somebody say yes. Yes. Ah. Human sensing systems have always been thought of as a lesser part of the human mind, so they've never had their own metaphor. Did you know that? It took me quite a few years to realize, no, you talk about the mind's function, but you don't talk about the functions of the sensing systems within it, so they've never had their own metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech denoting one kind of object or idea that is used to suggest a likeness or analogy to another object or idea. You know, she was so wonderful, she was like a rose. That kind of thing. We have a good metaphor for our human sensing systems, though, and it's radar, the word radar, detecting and ranging. A radio device or system for locating an object by means of ultra-high radio waves reflected from the object and are received, observed, and analyzed by part of the detecting part of the device in such a way that the characteristics of the object may be determined via preset reference grids or reality boxes. So what comes into consciousness is a blip, a pulse, a signal, or an image, especially on a radar screen, an electromagnetic wave or modulation of brief duration, as things that are impacting on our consciousness, interference patterns or waves of the same or nearly the same frequency. These are our subliminal processes that are handling all this information. So blips are actually the beginning of perception. Do you ever feel blips? Nobody's ever felt a blip? That's why it's taking me so long here to get a response out of you. Okay, here, we consider this. If it ain't blipping on my radar screen, it don't exist. Anybody thought of that? If my reality box can't detect it, it don't exist. Right? If it does not fit with our reality box, we should shoot it. I'm being forced to jump ahead here. How about that? Huh? The SRI project came into existence when U.S. intelligence agencies recognized the magnitude of psychotronic work in the USSR in about 1969. Psychotronic refers to subtle biomind goal-directed energies and communications. It also refers to information transfer. The 15-year project at SRI involved over 500 people, multidisciplinary consultants, dozens of oversight committees. It was the largest U.S. effort ever undertaken on behalf of subtle perception. So when I say I'm the father of remote viewing, I want to tell you that there were over 500 people that were the co-joined fathers of remote viewing. And I sort of don't like it that these 500 people or more just simply get dropped out of the frame of reference. It was a big project, 500 people. The 15-year remote viewing project became U.S. government classified in 1976. No one without secret or above clearances could work on the project. Even so, public opinion held that sci-spies were being developed. And we tried very hard to do that. The 15 years of funding was directly linked to demonstrated evidence of increases in knowledge and product accepted by oversight committees via double and triple blind testing. Have you ever been examined by an oversight committee? The 15-year-old project was developed within the context of information theory applied to subtle perceptual channels for information transfer over distances. The whole of this project was the brainchild of Dr. Harold E. Puthoff, and was actually the sustaining father of it, because he and Russell Targ fought the terrible battles at the government and social levels that needed to be fought. Had it not been for the vision of Dr. Puthoff, you would not be here today. There were three major phases of the 15-year-old project. 1972 to 75, confirming the existence of subtle perceptual channels. 75 to 78, increasing the capacity for information transfer. 78 to 85, training the increased capacities for the information transfer. Was that okay, Hal? Generally? Studies for the first phase were completed in early 1976. Evidence for the perceptual channel was presented by Puthoff and Targ at the 1976 annual meeting of the Institute of Electrical Engineers. This was top flight science group that met annually. This was the last public presentation of the project's work before it became classified. Here is a bit of this paper that was published at the IRVA and delivered by Puthoff and Targ. I'm going to point out something very interesting about the title shortly. The paper presented evidence for the existence, scientifically confirmed existence, of a perceptual capacity channel whereby certain individuals are able to perceive and describe remote data not presented to any known sense. The perceptual modality most extensively investigated was the ability of both experienced and inexperienced volunteers to view by innate mental processes remote geographical or technical targets, including buildings, roads, and laboratory apparatus. The accumulated data indicated that the channel was not deterred by distance and that Faraday cage shielding did not degrade the quality and accuracy of the channel's perception. However, the efficiency of the perceptual channel ranged from weak to sometimes robust and was variable and often unpredictable. Subject responses also demonstrated irrelevant information, absent information, lack of important details, lack of cognitive realization about what the target actually was. Have any of you intrepid remote viewers experienced those difficulties? Before I move on, I want you to look at the title of this, A Perceptual Channel for Information Transfer Over Kilometer Distance, Historical Perspectives, and Recent Research. This is not a parapsychology title. Can you see that? This is information theory words. And it was, well, that's what was researched, and it was closely emulating the Soviet work at the time in terms of terminology. By 1975, the funding clients had agreed that the subtle perception channel existed in both experienced and inexperienced individuals. But they also agreed that notable difficulties made it unlikely that remote viewing could ever be used as a dependable intelligence tool. The reason why it was not thought of as a viable tool is because there are several standard modes of intelligence support. There's HUMINT, connect as spies and people. There's SIGINT, signal intelligence, ELINT, electronic intelligence, IMINT, image intelligence. And if you can get a good idea of what these intelligence gathering things are if you watch two movies. Have you seen Patriot Games in 1992 with Harrison Ford? An Enemy of the State with Will Smith, and you see what all of these spy in the sky things can do. You know, they can bring gum wrappers in the New York gutter and everything. So the people that were in favor of these kind of things says, what do we need remote viewers for? I mean, they can't even get a whole building sometimes. So remote viewing, to become an intelligence tool, had to become really, really good and had to be able to tell the interested clients things that they couldn't get by their wonderful machines. So by the end of '75, the clients had decided to cease funding, but put off and others begged more money, and came to phase 2 of the project. Could we increase the capacity for remote viewing information? And I'm going to shorten this a little bit because I think you all know generally about it. The biggest thing that deterred increased information accuracy was noise in the system. And the noise does not come from the distant target, it comes from the internal processes of the remote viewer. I think we can all agree that that's probably the case. Can we?
Yes.
During phase 2, Dr. Puthoff determined to address the difficulties via an important aspect of information theory, the signal-to-noise ratio. So we had to start researching not only the signal, but where the noise was and what the noise came from and so forth and so like this. This is just a good radio engineer problem. If you have a noisy channel, you can't get the program through, so you have to find out where the noise is coming and eradicate it if you can. Okay, that's just standard engineering. So here I showed the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by Satchidananda. And here's a good example of noise in a system, in a human system. Satchidananda says, for example, you want to meditate on a rose. You form a mental impression of the rose. Do this, follow this, form a mental impression of the rose, and then just do what I tell you to do from here. Y'all got a mental impression of the rose? Okay. And when you look at it, the mind will try to go somewhere. Is your mind trying to go somewhere? Let it go this way. The minute you begin, the mind will say, oh yes, I remember she sent me a rose like that for my last birthday. Make the mental image pictures. Then the rose is gone, but she is there. After that, we had dinner, and it was the best dinner. She is now gone, but the image of the dinner is there. Then the mind remembers that after dinner we went to see movies. We saw King Kong. And so an image of King Kong appears in the mind. All this will happen in 2 minutes or less from the rose to King Kong. The mind is like that. That's the nature of the untrained mind. Do you enjoy that little transition? So a remote viewer looks at something, he says, that's an up and down thing. And then the mind says, well, that resembles the mountain I saw when I was 10. And then the mountain had snow on it, so it must have been wintertime. And then we went skiing on the mountain and so forth and so on. And pretty soon, where are you? This we eventually dubbed, under Puthoff's direction, analytical overlay. We had help, though, in identifying this. Remember this book? The Subliminal Perception, Nature of a Controversy, published in 1971 by Norman F. Dixon. This is another book you should be reading as a Bible if you want to become a good remote viewer. He later produced this book in 1981, which is even better than the earlier one. And these two books give a very good idea of what's going on inside the mind, processes in a preconscious way. The signals come in, they go through the preconscious process, and what survives the preconscious process comes into consciousness if you're lucky. Here's one brief diagram. Oops, sorry. Taken from his books. The input goes through all these things here. You see internal standard down here? That's actually reality boxes. The reality boxes that you have act as your internal standards. The comparator there is comparing on importance and if you like it or not and so forth and so on. You get additional AOLs if you come there. Memory store and the memory averager, it's really a difficult thing. We found an easy way around all this. So when a signal comes in, it could go through belief barriers, label barriers, memory comparison, creative additions, imagination, random uncontrolled thoughts, idea making, and intellectual decisioning, which is simply guessing what something is. Right? Noise obviously did not belong to the distant target, but to the perceptual channel of the viewers. So we reviewed over 200 previous RV records and this showed that viewer outputs roughly contain 10 to 15% signal-related information bits. Thus, the average signal-to-noise ratio was about 15% signal at best to 85% noise. So this is what it looked like in terms of the intrepid remote viewer. The target signals come in, clean and nice. They go into this bigger hole in his head, and then he puts out what he thinks he should output into the physical universe. And the dark ones are noise, added because of his or her processes. That's easy to understand. Who said that? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's accurate.
It's realistic.
Well, it's accurate. Okay, one of the biggest complications with the signal-to-noise ratio was that no one, including the viewer, could tell the difference between the signal and noise before the target was examined. After the target was examined, which is called feedback, it could be seen that most of the noise consisted of irrelevant or confused information which did not belong to the target. But what about before feedback? Actually, you could not take a remote viewing session if you didn't know what was erroneous in it and give it to the CIA or something like this and here, this is what we got. You figure it out. They're not going to figure it out. They're going to say, well, we don't want this. Go wipe something with it. Well, they don't have time to do that. If we're offering a product, we should be able to offer a relatively noise-free product, right? I mean, you don't do a recording in a studio and then try to sell it with all the scratches and everything in it. You got to clean it up. When these 200 targets were reviewed and seriously considered, it became apparent that viewers downloaded their impressions in one of two modes. Certainty, they were very certain about certain things, and other ones they said, well, maybe it's this, qualified certainty and everything like that. And here are some examples. It might be, it could be, it seems, maybe, perhaps it's this, I think it's this, I'm not sure, but it resembles, I guess I'd say it is, possibly it is. These are all qualified certainty statements. They're not as, what's that? 30 minutes? Oh, I have plenty of time. Thank you. 30. So people would say, it's a house. It's a rocket facility. And other people would say, well, maybe it's a house, but I don't know what it is, actually. And it might be a rocket. It might be a haystack or a corn silo someplace. See? Two different kinds of statements. Put off, got the idea. All right, let's go through these sessions here, and we'll just take out everything that has a qualified uncertainty with it. So we just took out all of those kinds of statements. And you know what we ended up with? 80% signal and 15% noise. Could the remote viewer be trained to do this himself or herself? I mean, we should train it. Look, this is a qualified thing. It's probably not belonging to the target. It belongs to your head thing like that. So we did a little training sequence on this, and this is what the result looked like. Whoops. You see viewer output before signal noise training, a mixture of noise and signal, right? After training, the noise got lined up by selection and that left the signal. So we knew we could train the viewer to recognize their own signals, signal and noise. When we managed to do this, then we could tell more about the signal line because we could spot it right away. And we began to see that it came in packages that unwound themselves in a preferred state of unfolding. And this corresponded very closely to information theory ideas like this. Here you have a package of information down here. If it's a clear channel, it unfolds to organization of details, organization of permutations, organization of relevance, organization of applications, and increase in scope, providing it's not a noisy channel. Does that make sense? Thus, we entered phase 3 at the project of SRI, training the increased capacities for remote viewing information transfer. And what we ended up with was a very complicated 6-stage training process which followed the natural unfoldment of a basic information package, and it looked like this. The person is assigned a site to look at. He gets an overall ambience, a big signal, and then there's tactile sensing of the site, dimensions of the site, details of the site, non-physical information of the site, and you can do 3-dimensional clay models. That's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it's a very complicated thing. I need a week to tutor you in this, even at the most superficial levels. So I'm just going to show you here some samples of 3-dimensional clay models by one of my best students, Lieutenant Colonel Tom McNear, who wanted to be here today but couldn't make it, but gave me permission for the first time to use his name in public. Okay, now all he gets is a coordinate. And none of these were his final trials where he didn't get any feedback during the session, so he was totally on his own. And he did 4 clay models, and here's the first one. Well, come on. He didn't have any feedback or any reinforcement as he went through. He was now supposed to be an achieved remote viewer, and he was totally on his own. Do any of you recognize this? Almost, yeah. That's Bunker Hill Monument. And he built the tower. It does not have the little thing on top of it, but it does have a fence around it. See? And a road in front of it. And he did it all by himself. On stage 5, non-physical information, he got some phonetic information, and the last one was B-U-K-E-R, Bucker. He did not quite get Bunker Hill National Monument, but he got Bucker. And this was the beginning of a telepathic contact with the nature of this site. Isn't that nice? Oh, it was wonderful. Oh, here's another one. Here's his clay model. He also got some phonetics called tu, u, and tolu. Does that help anybody recognize it? What? Well, somebody back there said, well, I didn't quite hear you, but it's Tulum, yes. Tulum. Well, that's Tulum. And he got really close, Tolu. But he did not recognize it as Tulum. It took him about an hour to do each of these, There was no dialogue between him or me, and he just sit there patiently and watch him do this with his little clay. Here's his fourth one. We know what that is, right? What is it? Almost, but not quite. Here it is with his feedback. The phonetics he got with this were arc, arco, and arcus. And it's the Arkansas nuclear reactor. He came that close to identifying it by name. Here's his fourth one. It's a very complicated, it looks easy to do when it's done, but it's a very complicated thing to wait for him to get all of these things in sight. Airline terminal. Uh-huh. What else?
Dam, spillway.
Do you recognize which dam? The phonetics he got were ga, gra, and gra. And it, pardon? Grand Coulee Dam, yeah. Look at it. Stage 6, achieved remote viewer, can build clay models, can almost get the names, everything, which scared some of our clients to death because it was telepathy. I had the opportunity to train Jim Schnabel. Do you remember his book? I had to train him because he's going to do a damaging expose of remote viewing. I said, you'd better learn what this is, and you're going to be good. He did it. I invited Bob Durant to do it, and they both turned in. I gave them a really quickie course, just up to the point where they could build clay models. They both turned out really well. They would have both made great remote viewers. And I'm going to show you, after not more than 2 months of off and on training, Bob Durant did, this is his first step. You see the little squiggle pointing up there? That's an ideogram. You see the peak? You just think that's a scribble, but this is what it evolved into on paper. I'm sorry these aren't very good slides. Can you see this tower with these things? Here it's developed a little more, and 2 or 3 more have entered into his perceptual range of conscious attention. Here's one that sort of seems floating. Here's one that's, he thought at this point he could probably build a clay model now. He added 2 or 3 more towers and a round thing down here, and then he went to work on his clay model, and that's what it ended up as. I'm going to ask Bob Durant to come now for a few minutes. Do you want to hook him up? Yeah. Okay. Study this. And here's what the target was. Oh. Study that. And here's what the target was. Hey.
I hope you're not applauding me. This is the guy, my teacher.
You can leave that one on.
Well, I'm going to sit down.
You can. You're free now.
It won't go in. Okay.
You have to hold that for the audience.
The only thing I told him to do was to go with his feeling. He said, I don't know what to do next. Go with your feeling. Go with your feeling. So he worked his way through it.
And Ingo asked me just
8 minutes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yes, sir. Okay.
Yes, sir, is the answer. I've learned that long ago. He said just talk to them a little bit about the training you went through and about how you felt when you did this. Throughout the training, I was just sort of confused and behind the curve, as I have been in almost every course that I've ever taken, and I think you'll sympathize with me. But what it seemed then and now was a series of miracles. And I mean that in the sense of the natural law being overturned and seeing a miracle, and the next day another miracle as I do another remote viewing session that works out, from very simple ones to a very complex one like this, has had a profound effect on me. Something tells me that had I taken a battery of psychological examinations before and then after, they would find the same person with the same strong points, weak points, and so forth. Thank you. Just checking, yes. Notice I'm not reading this, but okay. Jeez. My personality was not changed by this, but my worldview, my philosophy, whatever term you want to apply to this, and I'm not a religious person, but as close as I can get to religion, this is it, because I walked in fundamentally a materialist and an atheist, and I'm still an atheist, but what I know for sure is that my conception of the way the world is glued together, which is essentially the received conception of modern science, is wrong. At the very least, it is very incomplete. What I know now from experience, and that beats every intellectual route, is that I am part of a universal sea, the cosmic soup, whatever you want to call it. It's real, folks. Step 2, I'm in touch with every little bit of that infinite cosmic sea, the biggest things out there and the most minute. So in that sense, it's had a profound, staggering effect on me. Now let me see if I've missed something here, Ingo. The training itself. You've seen this guy in action, but actually, as the trainer, yes, he was very strict, because this requires a really systematic, never get out of the lane type of work on the part of the viewer. And you just have to train yourself that way. And I think in this respect it's probably not that different from learning a musical instrument. But this guy was infinitely patient. He may not have been that way with you today, okay? He was with me, God bless him. Also, never a discouraging word. In the early training sessions, we would verbalize as well as write the data. He would either say correct, or he would say can't confirm, but he would never say that's wrong. Interesting approach, but that's him. The final session, I can't go back to that slide because my time is up, but
30 seconds more.
30 seconds more. No, if you can go back to the initial worksheet, it's just a personal note to the rest of the remote viewers here. The very first one where I took the coordinate, is that it? Okay, I can't see that very well. I hope you see it better than I do. Note that I took the coordinate 3 times. Note, if you're not a CRV person, I guess you don't know what I'm talking about, but I just want to say this to you. You saw the product. and that's first class if I say so myself. The reason I took it 3 times, and note it's the same ideogram, just reinforcing the third time much more distinct, and you can see that the final product comes right out of that ideogram, doesn't it, the way it's supposed to. But I took it 3 times because of performance anxiety. I want you to know that I was really nervous, as I always am every time I sit down to perform this miracle, okay? And I just want you to see that I did it that way. And Ingo, thanks for teaching me. Thanks for letting me brag that I'm a remote viewer, and Ingo Swann taught me. All right.
I feel like it. Am I turned on? Yeah. Oh, okay. I feel like a dancing dog getting hooked up. That's it, kids. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming, and I hope you learned something. How much time do we have?
How much do you want?
I'll take a few questions.
Questions could be taken in the back or outside. We have another speaker lined up at this time.
Who is that?
The speaker? Well, I'll tell you. Right now we've got Cleve.